This is a story about hope and joy and heavy lifting, the story for the Easter season. It's part of the KC story and is best told by Randy Malm, caller and retiring president of Help End Homelessness, Howard County. Help End Homelessness was the first all volunteer organization that provides permanent housing for homeless families in Howard County. So, Randy, how did it all start?
Well, it started by forming a vision. And after the cold weather shelters, there were many of them, everyone was still homeless. And a man named Joe Wilmot came to Kittamukundi and made a presentation. Uh, he talked about housing first as a possible solution. And housing first you can't solve life's problems while you're homeless. So you need a house. So I asked him, what is permanent housing? And he says, well, it's either a deed or a lease. So I said, okay, well, a deed, we can't do that, but a lease we could do. So we formed a focus group, and there was about 10 months of discernment. The result of that discernment process was housing homeless families with minor children. We considered other things like multiple single adults and so on, but that's where we wound up. We wanted these families to be able to get back on their feet and move on so that we could rent the space to yet another homeless family. And our goal, as we said it then, was to create 5 homes for homeless families.
Well, that sounds like a monumentally huge stone to roll away from the tomb. What were some of the heavy liftings in the early years?
To start with, we had to form a corporation, and we did, called Help End Homelessness, HC, Howard County Incorporated. How did we do that? Well, Ann Ivester suggested Jim Mayer as a pro bono lawyer. And indeed, he did serve that function. He created the articles of incorporation and the bylaws for our corporation. And we needed initial donations to pay for the filings of those things. So you, Ken, and I were the ones who put that money up front, knowing that since we weren't a 501c3 yet, we wouldn't be able to deduct it from our taxes. So thank you for helping us with that. We formed a board, and the board actually grew broader than just KC. In particular, we had Leonard Vaughn on the board, and Leonard was the former director of housing for Howard County. So we needed some funding, so we couldn't get it because we didn't have a 501c3, but we made presentations and asked for provisional funding. The 501c3 application wound up taking 16 months to get.
I remember that when you heard your call, you held a meeting after worship at KC. At that very first meeting, attended by, I don't know, maybe 3 dozen members of our congregation, we received personal pledge donations of $38,000. That generosity has continued to this day.
One particular important person was a man named Tom Carbo. He was the Howard County Housing Department director. We met with him to tell him what we were doing and to see if they had any ideas. And he suggested CDBG. Well, what's that? Well, it's a Community Development Block Grant. It's federal money that comes through the county, and the county administers it. So he suggested that, so I applied for $50,000 grant initially. When it came time to buy our first home, the Casey pledges and the loan, which I'll say about in a minute, and other donations by August 15th enabled us to do that. The loan was, Casey had loaned money to a group in Washington, D.C., $25,000 at 2% simple interest for an indeterminate period of time. So Casey called them and said, hey, can we pull that money back? And they said, oh, sure, okay. And they did. So they loaned it to us then. And with that and the donations we were able to raise, we were able to purchase our first house.
Well, we did have a little help. Glenmar United Methodist Church joined us early on, and they have remained a partner throughout. We've been joined by some other groups too.
Tom encouraged us to go on, and so I've applied for another $50,000 a couple days ahead of time. He actually marked up my proposal to 100,000, and that proposal was approved. And so we wound up with $150,000 from those two things that enabled us to move on to buy our second house.
Tom definitely was an angel who helped move that stone.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about some others?
Yes, we have, so far we have 255 donors. So it's much broader than Kittamukundi. We have NGOs, which are companies and foundations. The W.R. Grace Company, and this is, I just love this story, started their own outreach fair. After working with us for a while, they decided, hey, this was a pretty good thing. Their employees could benefit from serving others. So they started their own outreach fair. But in the meantime, we've had nearly 100 volunteers, including our board members and people who would come to help us paint or clean or fix up things that needed to be fixed up in the many houses that we bought. We totally bought 5 so far.
There's no way we could recognize everybody or even all the major ones. But I know there are a couple of special volunteers. Could you tell us a little?
There are 2 of them who are very close to my heart. Jim Hudock is a highly skilled perfectionist. We had a parquet floor in this last house that was damaged by the sun and maybe some other things, and a floor supplier said it couldn't be fixed, but that didn't stop Jim. He fixed it. It was just amazing. Also, the windows in this last place, those aluminum casement ones that slide back and forth, they weren't working and so on. He took them all apart, fixed them all, put them back in the right order, and now they all work beautifully. My other very favorite volunteer is a woman named Adrienne Zent Taylor. She's from Glenmar. We call her the furniture lady. She takes in furniture from donors, which she has solicited. She stores it in her garage, in her basement, in her family room, in her living room. And if it needs any kind of work like refinishing, she does that as well. At this last house, she came in while Jim and I were there. She was carrying a bag of supplies in her left hand, a bifold door under her right arm, and was apologizing for having forgotten to put on her mask. She is such a treasure.
There were some stones as we went along. I remember that. What about getting and keeping good tenants?
Oh boy, now there's the problem. We did insufficient vetting in the beginning. We didn't look at people's backgrounds. We just trusted what they wrote on their applications and that they had been recommended, usually by grassroots. But that didn't work very well. We wound up with evictions and non-renewals. And that was hard for us. We had to learn how to do it in court, and it took several court appearances to actually get evictions. And it was hard to bear.
How did you fix that?
Well, we had a new board member come on who started doing background checks for us, which we hadn't thought to do. And since then, we've also expanded the application form. It's now 5 pages instead of 2. And one of the results of that is that it helps vet by people looking at the requirements in the application and saying, oh, well, I'm never going to get accepted, so I won't bother to apply. So that helped us in the vetting process.
You have talked to me about some personal stones, that you get a stone in your shoe and it hurts when you walk. Would you mind telling a little bit about that?
In the beginning, Heather Kirk-Davidoff was the president and you, Ken, were the vice president, but you both left. And that was devastating for me. Heather moved away. Her husband Dan took a job in Albany, New York, and you, Ken, were called to this diversity and inclusion mission. Uh, and so it was all reasonable that you both left, but it was hard to lose you. And probably most recently, since I've retired from HEPA and homelessness, and the loss of my avocation after 9 years has been difficult for me.
Well, looking forward, what brings you joy?
Oh, Joy, we got our 5 houses. We have 5 houses now. And in that time, since we got our first one, we've managed to house 10 families. Of course, not all at once, of course, but 10 families, including 13 adults and 28 children. That's 41 homeless persons that we've housed to date. We're currently housing 5 families, because we have 5 units now, with 5 adults and 14 children. I'm grateful for all the support that I have received personally, and that we as a nonprofit have received from Kittamukundy, from other donors, volunteers. It's just over board members. It's just overwhelming. And I'm also grateful for the opportunity to share here.
Can you tell folks a little bit about where Help End Homelessness is now?
We have new board members who have nonprofit experience. One of them was the president of the Columbia Orchestra for many years, and the other one said she has spent her whole career in nonprofits. Both of them said, well, we'll do fundraising, but we don't want that to be our principal requirement. So I says, oh, well, I'm just happy to have you. And I think that now that I'm gone, and our new president will treat it more like a business than a startup. He'd been holding my feet to the fire about things in the bylaws that I hadn't been paying much attention to, and so on. So he was a logical place to go from that. HEHHC is still the best bang for your charity buck. We have no employees. We're all volunteers. And no debt. We have no interest payments, and we pay no taxes.
So Randy, as you look forward, any projections on what's up for HEHC in the future?
Well, I think that there's going to be more CDBG money available, and I think that if the board wants to buy more houses and house more homeless people, they will, and they can. They know how to do it. And in addition to that, one of our other goals was to provide information to other units, other people who might want to do what we've already done. And we think that's going to help not just HEHHC, but the whole homeless situation in the whole United States.
Wow, thanks. Thanks for sharing the story of Help End Homelessness with us. So this is truly a living Easter project. The trials, the joys, the angels, the heavy lifting, the rolling, they're all there. Next, we invite everyone present to take a minute for silent reflection about what it says about us being Easter people.